let's get into this because this lawsuit we had to talk about because the implications of this are absolutely enormous for the esports industry. And it all goes back to the fundamental esports conundrum, which is why do the publishers who own the IP have complete dominance and control over the esports scene? Because as you've probably heard us say many times, nobody owns the intellectual property of basketball or football or soccer, which means that while it might be difficult to go create a rival league to the NBA, it is in theory possible for a bunch of very rich people, to go make contracts with all the great NBA players and create some sort of rival league. And in fact, most American sports leagues were actually born out of the mergers of rival leagues that previously existed. So in this instance,
context, actually.
So in this instance, we have a very interesting scenario where it is not possible in esports to run competitions without developer/publisher approval. Do you want to talk about this, Harris? Like the legality that we're dealing with here?
Yeah, I mean,
Do you want to introduce Harris first so we can frame his expertise?
So Harris, I have seen on Summoning Insight previously talking about the salary cap. He is an attorney who works for ESG Law, which is a law firm that represents mostly teams within the esports space. Is that fair to say, Harris?
Yeah, that's fair to say. We obviously have been involved in. So just as at a high level, we were the ones negotiating the team participation agreement that is actually discussed in this complaint. I guess it was back in 2019 or 20. I can't remember the exact year, but we negotiated that on behalf of, I want to say 70% of those teams. And so a lot of the times what will happen is like we're kind of just all getting together and we're saying, okay, what are the things we want to talk about? What are the things we like, we don't like? And we'll kind of push back on it. Thank you for the introduction and thank you guys for having me on. I think that at a really high level, as you mentioned, Monte, it kind of comes back to everything around the Copyright Act, right? Like, so absolutely every right that under the sun is basically claimed by Activision Blizzard by virtue of the fact that they have what amounts to a copyright in Call of Duty. And that's the game that we're talking about here right now, right? So there's exclusive rights conveyed by the copyright, particularly Section 106. And what is essentially claimed then is that derivatives of the work, which is the copyrighted game, the Call of Duty game, derivatives of that, the right to create derivatives is an exclusive right that is owned by Activision Blizzard under Section 106 of the Copyright Act, meaning the play and any kind of audiovisual display of that play would also be owned under Section 106 of the Copyright Act. So
this also applies, by the way, guys, to translate this for you into, for example, when content creators make their own streams of playing games that you like, so League of Legends or YouTube videos or whatever that show the gameplay or intellectual property of that game, technically the publishers also have rights over that. And you'll see on their websites that companies like Riot or Activision Blizzard give open licenses to use that to make money for your own content. Right, Harris?
Actually, the reason, by the way, I have never featured any in-game footage on my channel ever beyond, like, I guess, the screen where you do the stickers. Because even though it wasn't the case, I actually was always just thought, like, essentially anytime Riot wanted, they could just go, let's just shut this whole channel down and just put a bunch of cases on there and just wreck me instantly. So even though in theory they don't, like, as you say, Monty, they in theory grant the license. I mean, there was a famous case where they did do this. It was that guy with this, like, spectate faker. All he was doing was using the client to watch him normally, like OPGG, wasn't doing anything weird, and then they came in because it was their right. That's the thing people didn't understand. They were technically allowed to say this, and that was the one time they were going to revoke that sort of open right. They were just going to tell this guy that's weird and then shut him down.
And the reason why they don't do this is because obviously they want people to make content for marketing reasons, and also while they could, as in the Spectate Faker incident, have a heavy hand and come in, it is very bad PR for them to single people out, and also discourages people making content because people think, well, I'm making content. Why would I do this if I could be next? Right. So there are real reasons not to do it, but it's important that this is we stress that it's not only applicable to esports, it is applicable to all the ways in which people use the intellectual property of the game.
Right. And that basically stems from a reading of a case back in 1983. It was called Midway. And not to get too much into the case, but the basic idea behind the old guy who basically wrote that opinion 40 years ago was that a video game is more analogous to a dictionary where you could basically just place certain words and certain things, but everything is kind of contemplated ahead of time by the programmer who is putting together that that framework. Any kind of iteration of that game is kind of contemplated. So we're going to give the game developer or the publisher all ownership of the things, of all potential iterations of that. It's more akin to that than a painting or a literary work. So a good example would be consider Microsoft Paint, right? In theory, there is a limitation on the number of iterations of things that could be put in Microsoft Paint. That limitation is the number of pixels that are on your screen times the number of colors that can be used. That is a theoretical limitation. But at the same time, we are not saying that the owner of Microsoft Paint, the program, owns all iterations of paintings that could be put on Microsoft Paint. That would be a ridiculous assertion, right? But that's kind of what we're dealing with here, right? That's an in-depth area of copyright law, and not to get too far into the weeds on that, but that's the distinction that we're drawing. One distinction is on the one hand, we're contemplating that any kind of potential use of this or any kind of derivative is contemplated, but when it's fixed in that program. The second is we think that this person can exert creativity. We're not going to give the programmer all ownership of that kind of stuff. And that's kind of what we're talking about in this context here, Monte.
Russia actually as well, funnily enough, just it's kind of related. Obviously, I don't think Russia and China particularly as countries have a lot of respect for copyright law, if my experiences have taught me anything. But they're trying to get a bill pushed through the Russian parliament at the moment because they obviously are now international pariahs because of their invasion of Ukraine. They are worried that people might not want their intellectual property being hosted in their country, that there's a risk that game developers might say, we're not selling our game in your country, and by extension, you can't run esports tournaments in your country. It's our IP. So they're trying to pass a law at the moment that would allow people to run esports tournaments without the developer's approval. I don't know about the practicalities of applying that or what it would look like, but it's definitely something I've got my eye on because I think it's super interesting. I think the best thing that could happen for esports, honestly, would be some kind of either free use exemption, fair use exemption, rather, sorry, so people could use it freely within reason, or a licensing agreement like you have in music or something like that. I think if we had something like that in esports, so you could be free of the tyranny of the developer, all of a sudden the space gets a lot more interesting and undoubtedly profitable.
It would be huge. And clearly, I think I will add this caveat on behalf of Harris, but that's clearly in Harris's client's best interest because the teams are not particularly big fans of being under the boot heel of the publishers because the way that they extract the most value is if they became an American style sports league, basically a team owned league where they would actually reap all of the potential rewards of that as opposed to being forced into the intermediaries of the developers, which is what Thorin and I were working on with Flashpoint.
Those days are over. I think developers are going to look at all the legal problems that have come tumbling out of these developer-owned leagues in their attempt to run franchise leagues without having the proper legal requirements around them. And I think most developers now are going to outsource. I think that's the future. I don't think a developer's ever going to attempt anything like the Overwatch League or the fucking CDL ever again.
But the thing is that they're always going to take an ownership stake, right?
They
I don't see a world.
Sure.
Yeah. It's a question for the license too.
Yeah. Exactly. I think if you look at the system some other games developers operate, where they treat it like Valve or Microsoft. If you're a production company, you go and apply for the license, and it's essentially a pitch, and then they grant you the rights to host the tournament. And honestly, they're not looking for a profit share or any of that stuff. It's often just they want to have certain input, certain types of input into what the product looks like and how it plays and what you do with it and what associations it has with and what sponsors you plaster on it. It's more about that kind of thing. But I think the day of franchise leagues are fucking dead. You need a players union, you need a team owners union. You've got all, before you can even get around and collectively bargain, you can't put in the salary caps like they've tried to do. If you try and do anything clandestine behind the scenes, you're going to get fined, you're going to get sued, you're going to get fucked over. If your company has a negative headline in the games that you make, it spills over into the esports product you run. If you lose, you hemorrhage sponsors because of what Bobby Kotick's been doing, even though he doesn't really give a fuck beyond, will this make me money? So it's super. I think all the complexities. Games developers believe they can do anything. It's just like a recurring issue. They're super fucking up their own arse about their own capabilities. They think they can get away with anything. They're microdosing LSD at lunchtime and they think they're fucking Dr. Manhattan. Most developers are just fucking cretins. They're like downstream from Silicon Valley, very egotistical, think they're smarter than they are. I think these franchise leagues have basically taught them a very hard lesson about the realities of trying to be a sport and what you have to have in an American setting.
Well, I also think
I don't think they'll do it again.
I also think it's like kind of important to understand the history of professional sports, at least in America. I can't necessarily talk to the history of professional sports, and
I do appreciate that this episode is going to be a lot like the Putin interview. Like, well, to answer that question, I'd have to take you back to the beginning of sport when Krug got a baseball bat, and then so go on, hit us with it. Take us back into the time machine, the DeLorean. Go on.
All right. No. I mean, like in the 1800s, you basically had baseball, right?
Yes, you did. Keep going.
It's not wrong. This is where it starts.
Yeah, it's where it starts in the 1800s is baseball, right? You had clubs where people would actually pay to join a club and play competitive baseball. They paid to join a club, okay? And then that got really popular, and they're like, you know what? People want to watch people play, in these clubs because we enjoy this kind of thing. And then in the North during the Civil War, that was their form of entertainment, and people would go while the troops were stationed at a base. They'd go watch those people playing in clubs, and then eventually, what ends up happening is you get a bunch of people saying, "Oh, like we're making money off of this," and then their players are like, "Well, we want to get paid," and then there were professional teams like, "Okay, like you want to get paid? You're a good player. You're drawing people. Take us to the stands. Like here you go. We're going to pay you some money." And then they're like, "Well, this isn't fair. The Cincinnati Red Stockings are winning every single game because they're paying their players." And then they're like, "Oh, okay, we'll just combine all the teams that are paying their players." And that's actually the history of professional baseball and how we actually, got to kind of the National League in the 1870s. And so what is interesting is that like we never really had any of that kind of development in esports. We kind of just were like, okay, there's a little bit of interest. We're just going to force this down on you right now. We have no grassroots interest. We're getting a little bit, and we just got completely ahead over our skis. And I think that's kind of a lesson that is going to be hard learned by some of these developers. But my take on the issue is that we should be really reinforcing grassroots esports and building up kind of like we had over a 40-year period in the 1800s, as opposed to just jamming everything down people's throats when they're not quite ready for it and it hasn't gotten to its natural evolution point. And that's kind of how I feel about it. And to that end, by the way, I'm going to plug Smash because I'm a big Smash fan. I look at, my local that I have in my backyard. It's a couple blocks away from where I live in Brooklyn. And it's a beautiful thing to see that every Sunday you're going to have 50 to 60 people come and they're all going to play this game that they love and they're all going to compete in this tournament. And guess what? The person that wins that local, he goes to the majors and he goes to the regionals, and every single person in that local is cheering for him while he's over there because he's part of this community. And that, in my opinion, makes up grassroots esports. And that's what it should be. And
well, I love this. It's like you actually live, your actual life that you live is like the Amazon Prime series of esports lawyer who then like keeps down with the people and goes to his local and enters the fucking open or whatever it is and like smashing.
I play all the time, man.
Position at 3, gotta run. Like you've got to have 2 stock or whatever. Like it's perfect. Listen, obviously demographically you wouldn't get the lead role, but you could write it. Put it that way. You could write it.
I'm not that good of an actor, it's true.
Yeah, that's what he meant.
Yeah, I know. I listen, I took what he meant and I just the other way.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or be a pleb and don't.